wait for the regulations to clear up and then start your business. I think that would not have worked. A lot of companies have waited and are still waiting. And that's not what you would like to do. You have to work with what you have. And that was a key learning in our case. In fact, when we went to the government very early in our very early days and spoke to them, why we wanted to do business in India and why the policy should change. And they asked us, why do you think e-commerce is important to us? And he said, look, it's customer-centric. Customers will benefit. They'll have a great experience. They won't have to spend so much time shopping, etc. But he said, that doesn't matter. For us, what matters is how much investments will you bring in, how much you'll invest in infrastructure, how many jobs you will create, and so on and so forth. So again, there was a mindset change that you needed to drive in your company as well as in the government, that there has to be an alignment of interests. And I think the e-commerce industry has done that and more, really in terms of creating jobs, infrastructure, opportunity, and also has been very customer focused. So I think that's been a very good outcome. But still there are some myths that continue to exist, and we do see that in the fact that physical retail has been allowed to a certain extent, again with certain conditions, but e-commerce has not. And that's really been driven by a misunderstanding on how the models operate. And eventually it's really a technology front end to a very traditional way of doing business at the back end is a concept that has not been understood. And one of our conversations, it really came out very loudly that they said, look, in the physical world, we said states can decide, and therefore there's a geographic limit. And you guys are internet, so you can go anywhere. How will you control that? They said, no, we can even control it better than the physical world. We can restrict it to PIN codes and make sure that we only deliver in certain specific cities or states as any condition that you may like to put. So again, there is that misunderstanding, and there's an opportunity of a lot of education. But I think things have changed. They do understand this space a lot much better. This was in the very, very early days of e-commerce as we know it. The other thing that I think that Ajay spoke about and others have spoken as well is the importance of technology in the whole experience. I think even from an investor's point of view, people who are looking for VC funding and companies that are startups, the focus has to really be on technology. Actually, that's the value that you bring. That's the problem that you really solve by going online or using e-commerce platforms or any other internet-based platforms or business models. You actually solve a real-life problem. And that could be as mundane as a startup that someone has been talking to me is, a condition that you have where if you have to go to a nightclub, you need a partner of the opposite sex to be able to go with you. And he's developing a platform where you can instantly find somebody who's willing to go to a bar, all in a very clean way, because you can get entry and you can have a partner and then you can come. It's not a dating site, it's really actually a drinking buddy site. And so those are the things that a lot of innovation that we see happening. Of course, there are a number of safety issues that kick in. But again, that's where people are really thinking about and then solving even problems really relating to medical issues. And we have seen a lot of people kind of use the internet for remote medicine and then so on and so forth. So there is a huge gamut of opportunity that exists in between. But technology is what you really have to have at the center of your business. And I think if you don't have the technology and you don't innovate, you're not going to be successful. The last point I really wanted to make is that, when we think about businesses and business decisions, sometimes we are faced with very conflicting kind of situations because you have scarce resources and you wonder where to put your money in and what can take priority. And eventually what we have found, at least in Amazon, and I think every other e-commerce player in India is perhaps no exception, is that the customer is the king. The customer is at the center of everything that you do, whoever your customer may be. And if you can start working backwards from that point, you'll find that you'll make the right decisions on business models, you'll make the right decisions on use of resources, you'll make the right decisions in terms of business decisions that you need to make. And for example, we had a situation where our site was very customer friendly, but it's very heavy. And if you were to use it, say, on your mobile phone, and which is where people are using it the most nowadays, you would not get the downloads that you would. It would not download as quickly as you would like. The payments would get stuck. It was a bad customer experience. And we were also at the same time solving a number of other issues in terms of logistics, and that needed tech resources. And the question came, where do we put our tech resources? And there was a huge debate, and different teams were having a free-for-all on that one. But again, I think the customer centricity came to the rescue, and they said, look, this is what the customer does. And we have to enable a site to transition from a 3G or a 4G network to a 2G network, as happens very often with us when we use a mobile phone in India. And then we put that money in and that tech resources into that, solving that problem, and made a very light app and a very light browsing experience. So that's, I think one of the things that companies that are working in the new age will have to really focus on, to keep the customer at the center, their customer, whoever that person may be, and work backwards from there, and not the other way around. With that, I'll kind of conclude my remarks. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And with this, I thank all the panelists for their thought-provoking unfoldings. This intensifies, I'm sure, our imagination focusing on the current and future trends in the much sought-after e-commerce sector, the policies and their impact on businesses. I would like to request Ms. Anand to please do the honors by presenting the mementos to our esteemed panelists. And I would request her to please first present a memento.
I think we've not done a Q&A in a long time, so I think 2 sessions have completed. So,
sure.
So if I want to ask.
So yes, we leave it up to the audience to please shoot their questions to our guest and any queries you have. Over to you.
This is, no, I'm not. Just a simple question. Ashish, I just wanted to clarify. It's not a question, but I wanted to clarify. I did not say that the investment is coming in to meet discounts. The point I was making is that the losses are actually cash losses. These are not depreciation losses and not cash losses. So you need investment to continue to support these. And anything that is adversely done through regulation can prejudice this. So I just want to clarify that it's not to suggest that the sector is not contributing. In fact, started by saying it's contributing to lots of other development. Just wanted to clarify that point.
Anybody else? I thought e-commerce is a happening sector. No questions. We answered it all. I think in the 2 sessions.
There are several questions with no answers.
All right, so the right words, they answered it all. So on that note, Ms. Anand, may I please request you to hand over a memento, firstly to Mr. Ajit Balakrishnan. Please put your hands together, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, sir, for your inputs. May I also request her to present a memento now to Mr. Ashish Chandra. And the applauses should not stop, ladies and gentlemen. Next, we have Mr. Rajinder Sharma. Ma'am, may I please request you to present a memento to him as well. Last but not the least, may I request her to please present a memento to Mr. Rakesh Bakshi. And ma'am, may I request you to please come forward on the stage so that we can have the photograph together. So one final round of applause for the dignitaries together. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you all the panelists for their wonderful thoughts. All right, we now move on to explore further the realms of the e-commerce sector. Titled as Understanding the Sector, this session will delve deeper into the historical background of the sector, types and significance of electronic payments, role and importance of intermediaries and laws regarding validity and taxation of e-commerce transactions. May I request the moderator of this session, Mr. Ran Chakrabarti, partner in this law, to please come forward, ladies and gentlemen, with your applauses. Mr. Chakrabarti is an international lawyer and graduate of the London School of Economics and King's College, London. Currently based in New Delhi, Ran has previously lived and worked in London, Singapore, New York, and Geneva. He specializes in international project finance, international finance, cross-border acquisitions, public international law, and general corporate advisory. Please put your hands together once again for him. All right. Next, I would request Mr. Rachit Bell, partner AZB and Partners, to come up on the stage, please. Mr. Bell is extensively advised as one of the largest e-commerce companies and its subsidiaries in India on a variety of issues, including their entry strategy and corporate structuring. He comes with significant experience in advising on issues related to operating online marketplaces and related regulatory issues. Under, of course, the Indian Exchange Control, Information Technology, Drugs and Cosmetic Laws, Legal Metrology, Telecommunications Law, VAT legislations, etc. Welcome, sir. Thank you. Joining us next would be Mr. Anubhav Mehta, Legal Counsel, Commercial Banking, Standard Chartered Bank. Please put your hands together. Mr. Mehta is a law graduate from National University of Juridical Sciences, Kolkata in 2009. His enriching professional experience comprises of managing liabilities, cards, and alternate banking channel portfolios. He has also been involved in the launch of various initiatives such as Tap Banking, e-locker, and online banking platforms for banks and institutions. Hello, sir. Welcome. I would further request Ms. Shwetambari Rao, partner K-Law, to please join in our League of Panelists. She started her career with K-Law in 2004 and built the corporate and commercial practice in Bengaluru from a team of 3 lawyers to a team of 35 lawyers within a span of 10 years. She has advised various aspects in the e-commerce sector, ranging from setting up an e-commerce platform to functioning of its operations. Welcome, ma'am. The next speaker to join us is Mr. Tushar Jarwal, partner and senior member of the taxation group, DMD Advocates. Please put your hands together. With over 10 years of experience, Mr. Jarwal specializes in tax advisory and litigation. He advises a number of clients on issues pertaining to restructuring for tax mitigation, tax regulations and compliance, due diligence for tax savings, tax policy, interpretational issues, particularly in the telecom, banking, finance, property and construction, transport and aviation, manufacturing and services sector. Well, it's over to the moderator, Mr. Chakrabarti, for further proceedings of the panel discussion. Once again, a huge round of applause.
Thank you. Unfortunately, however, he has been called out on a rather urgent professional matter, and he extends his apologies for not being able to be here. I'm nevertheless absolutely delighted to be here and to moderate on his behalf. You've already heard the introductions in relation to our 4 panelists. Just very briefly, I'm going to outline the process of this panel discussion. We will start with Shwetambara Rao, who will be talking generally about FDI in retail trade, and perhaps that will tie in quite neatly with the origins of this sector. And no doubt she will touch upon the overlap of regulations and the degree of cohesion with the evolving e-commerce space. We will then be moving on to speak with Mr. Rachit Bal. Rachit will be talking about the framework, the legal framework for electronic payments. And he will later be talking about the issue of liability of intermediary platform providers, which is obviously a very hot topic at the moment. We will then move on to speak with Mr. Tushar Jawal, who will be talking generally about taxation in the e-commerce space. He'll be talking about the taxation issues both in relation to indirect and indirect taxes that, intermediary platform providers face, as well as sellers and service providers. And finally, we're going to be talking with Mr. Anubhav Mehta, who is going to be talking about the validity of e-commerce transactions, and what boxes need to be ticked in relation for a transaction online to be valid and binding. And in particular, I suspect we'll probably be talking about the issue of digital signatures. On that note, I'd like to hand over to Shweta, who will be our first speaker. Shweta, thank you. You may, if you prefer, you may sit down. Yeah.
A very good morning to everyone. I will be touching upon the topic of FDI regulation in the retail sector. This topic has been a point of contention and concern for some time now. And this concern heightens when we talk about the e-commerce sector. I won't be able to talk about the e-commerce sector independently without holistically talking about the FDI regulations in the retail sector. Having said that, I will first talk about the FDI regulations in the single brand retail trading, multi-brand retail trading, and then move on to e-commerce. Under single brand retail trading, there's been a lot of evolution. In 2006 is when FDI was allowed for the first time, and that was 51% was allowed under the government route. In 2012, this was increased to 100%. But this was again subject to government approval. In 2013, there was 100% FDI allowed, but 49% was under the automatic route. Beyond that was under the government route. There were certain conditions that were laid down over here. First is the brands that were sold in India should have been the brands that were sold internationally. These brands should have been branded, these products should have been branded during manufacturing. Third, if FDI was above 51%, then sourcing of 30% of the total purchased products should have been got from India itself. Some of the companies that have applied for FIPB approval from 49% to 100% are Puma, Bestseller, and Lush. Bestseller Group has basically 3 brands, 3 companies, and 3 separate FIPB applications were applied for. And so now they had presence in India as joint venture establishments. Now they have 100% stake in the companies. Moving on to multi-brand retail trading. In 2012 is when FDI was allowed in the sector. And this also was only up to 51% under the government approval route. And the conditions that were applied over here, one, there was a minimum investment requirement of 100 million USD. Second is 50% of such investment should be invested in back-end infrastructure within 3 years of the FDI coming in. Third is again with respect to the sourcing of 30% of the total purchased products being sourced from India itself. And there's another condition that was laid down, that if these retail outlets were setting up in a city, it should be only in those cities that had population of over 10 lakh. In the recent past, the companies that have applied and got FIPB approval are Tesco. There's a Dubai-based travel retail operator called Flamingo, and a US-based perfume company called Perfume Junction. From here, we go on to the e-commerce. There's 100% FDI allowed in e-commerce space, but that is only with respect to the B2B space. In B2C, there is no FDI that is permitted. There is specific mention that whether it's single brand retail or whether it is multi-brand retail, if it is through e-commerce, FDI is not allowed. So the next obvious question would be companies like Amazon, Flipkart, Snapdeal, how are they doing this? We know they have FDI in these companies. But the simple answer to this is they are not the retailers. They are just the marketplace. From here, then we go on to the concerns that are raised by the Retailers Association of India. What they are questioning is, can FDI be allowed in these marketplaces? Is it justifiable for them to allow FDI in these marketplaces? Isn't it the same as B2C? But like I was saying, it is a marketplace. It provides a service. It's not the retailer. It's just the trading platform. I'll be happy to entertain any questions on this topic post the session. Thank you.
Shweta, thank you very much for that. That was very interesting, and I think a nice kick-off in relation to seeing how bricks and mortar and clicks and mortar could perhaps become more cohesive in the future. Moving on now, I'd like to invite Mr. Ratchet Bal, who's going to be talking about electronic payment frameworks. Thank you, Ratchet.
Am I audible now? Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much. So I think the word for the day is frenzy. We live in very interesting times these. Before you are able to read the headlines, you have to go through 4 pages of discounts and deals and everything. And my mother has one very simple question. Leave aside everything, tell me what is this 1 kg gold offering that is going on. So very interesting times that we live in. And when it comes to, when you will see that the frenzy, so-called frenzy in this festive season has died down, there are going to be more news articles and media coverage about what is the GMV that a particular e-commerce website has achieved. People will be tom-tomming about the kind of sales that have occurred on their platform. But at the same time, you are going to be having certain customers who feel, oh good Lord, I did not get a good deal. The website overbooked the orders. There is going to be a refund scenario because the goods were defective. And now I'm anxiously waiting for the refund to come back to me. But whichever way you look at it, the fact of the matter is that money has moved somewhere in the ecosystem. Whether it's from the customer to the seller, it's from the seller to the customer in case of a refund, or it's in the pockets of those logistics or warehousing companies who support the entire ecosystem in terms of delivery, or even in case of reverse logistics. So the thing that binds everyone together, that brings everyone together, is the money. There is absolutely no doubt about it. But then the question is, when we think about money, and there is an anxious customer who is waiting for his refund to come back, who's also thinking, what is the time that the e-commerce company is going to take to refund my money? There's a loss of opportunity for me, for the more entrepreneurial kinds. The question to be asked is, what is the law that governs processing of electronic payments in India? The answer is, what amounts to a payment system? Payment system, simply speaking, or just simply put, is a system that enables payments to travel from Mr. X to Mr. Y, where they travel through the conduit, which is referred to as the payment processor or the system operator. So if I were to make a payment as a customer to a seller, and the website is helping me making that payment, you've got 3 parties involved. A payment system will necessarily involve 3 parties, which is why a 2-party bilateral contract is never going to qualify as a payment system, never triggering the licensing requirements under the PSS Act. So the catch in interpreting the definition of a payment system before the clarity finally emerges is that it involves a payor, it involves a beneficiary to whom the payment is due, and it involves a conduit who is going to help you process the payment and get the payment across from point A to point B. Now, once that is set in place, the next question is, what is the most popular model that all these e-commerce, or even if not all of them, then what is the majority model that is popular amongst the bigger e-commerce players in the industry? Now, before the RBI came up with certain guidelines, and as a necessity precedes any invention, any innovation, and before the RBI got innovative about it, there were issues about certain electronic or intermediaries in the electronic space. When the payment passed on to their hands, and before they were required to give it on or pass it on to the eventual beneficiary, they leveraged, in a manner of speaking, the funds that were available with them. Sometimes this leveraging went wrong, and as a result, people started complaining that I have paid the money, the seller is saying, but I haven't received the money, and both of them are then pointing fingers towards the guy in the middle. RBI woke up to this somewhere around 2009 when it introduced what is known as the intermediary guidelines of November 2009. The first thing that the intermediary guidelines allow you to do, in fact, first let's get to the definition of an intermediary. What is an intermediary? Intermediary essentially is a person who collects payments with respect to electronic transactions and then facilitates, mind it, the terminology is facilitates the settlement of the eventual obligation to the person to whom the payment is due, which is the beneficiary or the seller. So the moment an e-commerce company looks at this definition of an intermediary, I think majority of the players will fall into this definition or bracket of an intermediary. What these guidelines allow you to do is for an intermediary to open up an account that is referred to as a nodal account. Simply put, it's just another fancy name for an escrow. But the reason why this nodal account is important is that the guidelines specifically permit certain identified credits into and debits out of this nodal account. Fortunately, payments made by a customer or payments due to the seller or a failed or a disputed transactions are all specific identified payments which are allowed into and out of this nodal account. So a lot of the e-commerce companies, they actually rely on implementing this kind of a nodal account wherein the money is first pooled so that eventually it can be disbursed to the benefit of the beneficiary in a timely manner. Another important model that is very popular these days, if you don't want to use the nodal, but somehow nodal account is always into the picture, is with respect to prepaid instruments or gift vouchers. So when we talk about how to make the deal sweeter for the customer, there is always there is a gift card involved. You buy this, get a gift card, do this, get a gift card, loyalty points, etc., etc. So gift cards, interestingly, they have a separate set of guidelines, which again have been issued under the Payment and Settlement Systems Act of 2007. And the gift cards are, while they are all prevalent around us, somehow we just fail to take notice of a Sodexo coupon or even a credit card or a debit card. How do these cards operate? There is a framework, there is a methodology which has been prescribed by the RBI, and all the transactions that take place in the electronic commerce world transparently are processed by virtue of and under the aegis of these guidelines.